centuries before they put up this dam. So at this point, I'd be glad to answer any questions you have on any of the inland fisheries management. Thanks for coming. I hope you learned a little bit about fisheries.
While you're still talking, and your slides are up, talk a little about fish ladders and your experience with them, what they do and don't do.
Okay, fish ladders were kind of what they thought was the solution. Back in the 1870s, that was the solution. We'll put fish ladders in. We'll just put fish ladders in and we'll restore our fisheries. Well, we've had fish ladders in the Connecticut River and the Merrimack River for many decades now. It hasn't restored the fisheries. Basically, fish ladders are an imperfect solution to a natural stream. A lot of fish like the alewives, they can pass through fish ladders. But I showed the picture of the people fishing below the dam. That's still the best place. It backs up the fish. Not all the fish go through fish ladders. Some species don't go through fish ladders very well at all, like the brook trout. So the fish ladders are kind of an imperfect solution to that. If you look at the history of fisheries, I'm a fisheries biologist. I tell people I'm working on sea run brook trout. A little problem here. Out in the Pacific Northwest, they have the Pacific salmon runs that basically sustained the Native American culture out there for centuries. They built all kinds of dams to provide hydroelectric power. The federal government came in and built fish ladders at all the dams out there. So all of the dams pretty much out in the Pacific Northwest have fish ladders. Have they restored the fisheries? No. The fisheries in the Pacific Northwest have declined precipitously. These days there's a show on PBS. If you ever get to see it, it's about the Pacific salmon. It's a very sad thing to see. It's like they actually capture these smolts when they're in the upper reaches of the river, and they actually have to truck them through the reservoirs because they're all backed up. The fish can't migrate downstream through these reservoirs. So they kind of crowd them up. They put them on barges. Instead of allowing the fish to swim naturally, they barge them downstream. And then they dump them out below the dam where there's a waiting sea lion and birds, stuff like that. So the fish ladders, everybody thinks is, oh, we'll just put a fish ladder in there. Well, basically, it doesn't work that well. I mean, that's kind of like the bottom line with fish ladders. They're not the same as a natural stream system. And, people do put in fish ladders. It's kind of a Band-Aid approach. In fact, there's laws on the books. If you own a dam, you have to put in a fish ladder, fish passage. Do all these dams have fish ladders? No. In the ones that do, a lot of them aren't maintained very well. They only function at certain water flows and that sort of thing. So they're not a great solution. They'll work a little bit, but it's not as good a solution as removing a dam or breaching it.
Do you have any concern about stocking ponds with a lot of fish, being afraid they might end up eating the smaller brook trout that you're trying to preserve?
Yep, that's basically one of the reasons why we basically stock only in specific areas, like the old mill pond. I mean, we have kind of put bigger fish in there lately. Back in the old days, they dumped a 6 and 9 inch brook trout in there. I put in some bigger fish. But generally, the ones that we stock, they're only in there for a short period of time. People have this idea about stocking of fish. It's like we're going to replenish the fisheries. I'm the fisheries manager. I tell you, that's not the reason we stock fish. We stock fish to provide recreational fishing opportunities. The stocked fish are only in there for a short period of time. So they're not there in a long-lasting thing where they're going to impact the native fisheries. We do try to avoid stocking fish like the brown trout on top of our native fisheries. In fact, when I came on as fisheries manager, they were stocking brown trout in most of the streams that still supported wild brook trout fisheries, the Mashpee, the Santuit, the Quashnet. And that was one of the things that I did in cooperation with our Westboro staff in the early 90s, was basically stop the stocking of these non-native trout on top of our native species. It's like we were stocking non-natives on there. The bag limit at the time for the non-native ones was 2 brown trout. The native fisheries they were being stocked on at the time it was 12. And so we stopped the stocking of brown trout, which reduced the fishing pressure and reduced competition. And I have some data from the Quashnet River where the native fisheries actually responded greatly to that. It's one of the things that I look at as a fisheries manager is the impacts on the native species.
Do you have any ongoing studies that shows that these species you're concerned about have improved after dam removal?
Yeah, actually, we've been studying Red Brook right now. We have a pretty extensive tagging program. The talk I usually give is the results of the pit tagging, which is this technology. It's similar to the Fast Pass or the Theft ID tags, but it's a little size of a grain of rice. We inject them into the cavity of the fish, and it allows us to give a unique ID to the fish. And we've been studying the movements of the fish in Red Brook, in Quashnet, Red Brook, and the Childs River. And so it's one of those things that a lot of these studies take years to develop to actually tease out the impacts, but that's one of the things we will be looking at. I can tell you, the population, before there was sand, afterwards there was no sand. In fact, one of the places I had my antennas, they were spawning right above it, and that was right above where they removed the dam. So you can see visually the impacts almost immediately. But the long-term response of the fish population is something that you need a lot of long-term studies. And we're getting that a little bit, but we don't have any definitive answer, here's an obvious correlation there. We just don't have the manpower to do those type of studies.
So your main concern is sediment buildup and heat in the pond.
Right, in blocking fish passage, so it's fish movement. Whenever I mentioned the impacts of the dams, you put a dam in a stream, first of all, it causes sediment buildup. So you've changed the natural sediment transportation of the stream. You cause a buildup of sediment behind the dam. And if it happens to be a brook trout spawning area below there, you'll cover that with sediment, and that will block the groundwater flow. Also, the impact of warm water. When you open up water to solar radiation, you can get some big fluctuations. It doesn't take much sun power during the summer to increase temperatures beyond the lethal limit for trout. So it's a big problem in sustaining our brook trout fisheries. We're trying to basically remove these dams that are unneeded. You want good riparian buffers to block the solar radiation, to allow that groundwater to provide the optimum habitat for the brook trout.
The herring population, I'm just wondering how healthy that is, and do you foresee the moratorium on taking herring being lifted anytime soon?
Right. Actually, I mentioned I'm the fisheries manager for the Division of Fisheries and Wildlife. The anadromous fisheries are actually handled by the Division of Marine Fisheries. We're both in the Department of Fish and Game. So the person that would address that best is named Brad Chase. But in general, we've had a couple of good years, at least the systems that I'm familiar with, like Red Brook. We have seen 2 good year classes of alewife. But historically, compared to what they once were, they're still down. But we have had 2 good spawns, so possibly the moratorium is working, and they may be able to lift that at some point. But they're still down historically compared to what they were. Somebody hear a question? Or?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that in connection with the American eel, last year I saw some people at the Bridge of the Lagoon Pond, and they had some of those little American eels in them.
Okay, if you do see that, call the environmental police. That's a big enforcement concern.
They weren't taking it, they were looking for something else, but they were just looking at it.
Okay.
They said, "Oh, it's on."
Yeah, as long as they didn't have a Maine license plate and tanks in the back. That's a clue. If you ever see a truck with a Maine license plate with tanks in the back next to a stream, that's when you want to call the environmental police.
First of all, thank you for coming here on a Sunday afternoon. Very interesting talk. Must have been very exciting for you as a wildlife biologist when you're finding these trout up there in the upper reaches of the brook.
It's very satisfying to actually find these fish. It's like when I started as fisheries manager, there was only a handful of wild brook trout streams that were documented. And that's become one of my activities as a fisheries manager, is to find these little brook trout streams before they're gone. It's amazing how many little streams just get blanked out. You talk to some of the old timers, and it's kind of frustrating. They talk about these little streams that they used to get wild brookies in. And you go there, and they're gone. And in fact, the town I grew up in, people told me about a little wild brook trout stream. And I was out there sampling, and I'm sampling, and all we're getting is pickerel. And I'm getting a little frustrated. And when you know it, the way things work out, the guy that told me about it happened to be driving by. He stops, sees us, gets out, "Oh, you need to go upstream." And so we went like a couple of road crossings upstream, and sure enough, there was still wild brook trout surviving in there. But it's tiny little pockets of habitat. If these fish are there, it's like they're finding the last remaining habitat. And it's kind of like they're just survivors. They're holding on by the skin of their teeth. They're kind of hoping that these changes in the stream go away so that they're able to expand their population. But it was very satisfying to find them, and then also with the genetic study that was done by Brendan Annette, finding out that they were actually unique genetic strains in each of these streams, which kind of gave us hope that these actually were the native fish, instead of what people said, oh, these are just hatchery fish that spawn. Well, the data that we have indicates that they're not hatchery fish that spawn. They're actually these native fish that have been able to survive all these years in these streams.
Well, now, it should be, I would think that people in West Tisbury would be quite excited about it too. You've tromped around the brook quite a bit. If you lived here, and as excited as you are about brook trout, what recommendations would you make to ensure that that small remnant population remains healthy?
Well, basically what you want to try to do is expand the habitat as much as possible. If there are dams that are no longer being used, consider breaching them, basically allowing the stream to restore itself. So that's one thing. You have to look at the dam. I mean, people love these little bodies of water. They look at it, they see the wildlife. Oh yeah. Well, there's a lot of wildlife that use these little streams. You know, I was talking to Nelson Bryant was talking about the ducks. And he said it was a great place to go duck hunting when it was all iced up. And it was because of that warm water coming in. And so it's these little microhabitats that sustain species that are considered rare these days. They've basically been depleted. So if we can preserve these and expand these microhabitats, it's going to increase the biodiversity for the future. And it's one of these things when we're looking at these brook trout, you have to admire how much they're able to survive. You know, they're kind of pushed back into these microhabitats. So if there's anything we can do to try to expand those habitat, it will allow a greater brook trout population. I mean, one of the things at my agency, we've been stocking trout for 150 years now. And, you know, we do provide good recreational fisheries, but have we restored the wild brook trout populations for our streams? No, we haven't. It really takes habitat modifications and habitat improvements to restore our wild brook trout populations. That's actually our Division of Ecological Restoration. They've been doing a lot of dam removals lately, trying to restore populations to these streams. In fact, they did one in Mill River in Taunton. They took out some of these old dams. And one of the things that was surprise to the marine fisheries people, they were looking for the return of the alewives, which in fact did return. But one of the things that they found was a brook trout swimming through their camera. And so it's probably one of those brook trout. There's a couple little tributaries of the Taunton River. And so they were probably searching out some new habitats.
Is there any way to predict, like with a computer collage or something like that, if, say, the dam at the Millbrook, the big dam, you know, right in the town, Mill Pond, were removed, how that, I mean, what I visualize is like some beautiful meadows or something. And is there any way to predict what it would look like? Or what it could look like? Or?
Yep, basically there's, you're going to almost restore what was originally there. There's several small dams that they've considered removal. There's one over in Sippican River in Rochester. They drained it. If you look at the Google Earth, you can see a restored stream channel. So it was amazing how quickly that the stream channel will kind of restore itself. There was another dam that basically came out. It was another one of these ones. It was a safety hazard. The dam owner wasn't going to spend $1 million to fix the dam because they didn't need it anymore. So they basically drew it down and a nice natural stream channel reestablished. So you will have a stream channel. I mean, it's a possibility to have, if you still want some pond habitat, you might be able to create a pond habitat to the side and basically have it disconnected from the river. Because all these small ponds, they're not really ponds, they're impoundments. So they're basically blockages to the stream. You know, if you want a pond, you can dig a pond and basically have a stable pond habitat. Whenever you have a dam, you're basically blocking the sediment flow and you're causing an increase in temperature in the stream. You know, if you want a pond habitat, you can possibly build a pond habitat to the stream. But you know, if you want to have a good functioning stream habitat, you have to disconnect it from these ponds.
How many dams are there on the Millbrook?
Oh, boy, there's
10.
quite a few. There's
10.
at least 10. And those, you know, the one Prudy knows about, it's probably a good accurate figure, but it's like one of those things when you actually get in there and start walking some of the streams, there's a lot of old remnant structures that are in there. So there's quite a few dam structures on most of these streams around here. Any other questions?
I just wanted to say a couple more things. I've been, learning a lot more about this. It's almost one of those things that the more you learn, the less you know. What I went and talked to the Mill Pond Committee about back in the fall was I had just downloaded all the water temps for all the loggers. I did it on September 5th. And looked at the data on the computer, and these ponds are upwards of 90 degrees for 3 months. I mean, it's so hot. We didn't find, like, one of the things I like about the brook trout, we all talk about brook trout, but they've been referred to as the canary in the coal mine. If habitat is good for brook trout, it's good for everything. Is that an exaggeration?
It's good for a lot of stuff
Yeah,
that's
okay.
actually been in decline.
Work with me here. But the point is if you have brook trout, you have good riparian canopy, you have good habitat, you have good water quality, you have good water temperatures. So what I did is after I downloaded these temperatures, it was fairly sobering. I mean, it's so hot. So I went to the Mill Pond Committee at one of their meetings and I said, given what we've learned, isn't there room to have some kind of a different conversation about Mill Pond? Like, rather than just saying, let's dredge the pond to 4 feet deep, let's keep the pond the way it is because it's what we've always known. Well, we've only been here for 200 years, with the pond on the ground. The brook has been there for 10,000 years. So given what we've learned about ecology in the last 25, 30 years even, forget the last 100 years, it seems like we have the chance to make a better decision about meeting whatever our aesthetic needs are for this area right off of Eggertown Road, but also the needs of the brook. And like you said, it's not just Mill Brook. What I loved about your presentation was it's the connectivity of the whole system. It's not just Mill Brook, it's not just Mill Pond, it's all connected to Tisbury Great Pond. We are working with Brad Chase at Division of Marine Fisheries. The state has offered to put in a new fish ladder at Mill Pond. But Brad also wrote in his memo to the town, which I have multiple reports that we've actually done a few of Steve's recommendations already. We've gotten Steve's report. We have a habitat connectivity survey that was done that looked at all the culverts and the bridges and the obstructions on Mill Brook. It was done by the Division of Ecological Restoration. So I have a number of reports that have been done at no cost to the town, and if you want those, I can send them to you on email. I also handed out today copies of Steve's report, but I ran out because I never know how many of you are going to turn up, and I only made 30 copies. So if you want it on email, make sure I have your email address before we leave today. So what Brad wrote in his site visit memo after being out on Mill Brook for 2 days and then on the Tides Pond for a day was that yes, we, Division of Marine Fisheries, will put in a new fish ladder for you, the town of West Tisbury, and we'll do it at no cost to the town. We actually recommend dam removal for this location, and they would prefer to see stream connectivity restored at that location. Let me look at my cheat sheet. Okay, so, I mean, that's the main thing. The other thing about, Chris, I think it was you who asked about the fish ladders. The thing about the fish ladders is they don't address the other habitat problems. There's really no way around those high water temperatures. So yes, you can put a fish ladder in for the structural access. I mean, like I said, there's 10 dams on Mill Brook. There's 6 that create, sizable ponds, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But there's 4 or 5 more that there's the one that creates the Whiting Diversion that transfers water over to the Parsonage Pond down here below Alleys. There's a little one here. There's another one on the Woods property. The good news is that, and stop me, Kristen, if I get out of hand, but Adam told me it was okay to mention it. Some of the dam owners are talking about modifying the dams on their properties. Sheriff's Meadow Foundation is one of them. They're looking at modifying the culverts on the old Farm Road, Roth Woodlands Sanctuary, in order to create better stream connectivity at that location. That pond up at Roth Woodlands got up to 92 degrees this summer. So it's like a lethal situation. And so they've applied to the Division of Ecological Restoration to have Roth Woodlands Pond considered a priority project, and that would hopefully help them get grant money to proceed with a modification there. Other dam owners on the Tyasquam are in talks about modifications to their dams or removals of their dams. So it's kind of exciting to learn about. I mean, I wonder if any of you share my view about a compromise at Mill Pond. Raise your hands. Raise your hands now. I'm tired of standing up here alone. So the problem is what we've looked at so far is the town has had a couple town meeting votes about Mill Pond, but those votes have been taken without any true information about the real costs, like what will dredging Mill Pond actually cost financially. We don't have a dollar value yet. We don't, there's been very little information about the ecology, and that's why I'm so glad Steve's come down, why Michael Hopper came down, Beth Lambert came down. It just seemed too important to me not to learn as much as we could about the options in front of us. So we do have a vote coming up at our April town meeting. The Mill Pond Committee will be asking for, I think it's $30,000 to look into dredging design permitting for Mill Pond. I wish there had been a more expanded conversation about the options there, because right now we're still on a course for dredging, and I just really want you all to think about that when you go to town meeting this fall. Can we do something better there? April. What did I say?
Fall.
Oh, it's been a long month. Anyway, are there other questions for Steve or for me? Oh, good. Lady.
Now, the big deal here is the pond is something that everybody loves. Now, you say if we destroy the dam, we could still make a pond behind there somehow?
You could have a dugout pond. I mean, basically a lot of farm ponds were dugout ponds.
Yeah.
So there's a possibility. I mean, if you can dredge a pond, you can definitely create a pond.
Now, how about the temperature for the water?
As long as it's disconnected from the stream, it's not an issue.
Okay.
Basically, you've created a warm water pond habitat. The issue from an ecological standpoint is basically when you change the dynamics in a stream system. If you've created its own unique system, then it's going to be functioning by itself.
If you create a pond, no brook going through it, you've got a mosquito-breeding, stagnant pond.
Not if you have fish.
Pardon?
Not if you have fish.
Not if I have fish.
Mosquito larvae like to eat fish. So that's,
So maybe mill pond separate from the mill brook. I mean, what would count as the
Other way around,
not
yeah.
free streams? Parsnip
Fish.
pond.
Eat
Would
mosquito
parsnip
larvae.
pond
What's that?
then not have circulation? Don't
It
all.
has water running into it via the Millbrook.
Yeah, but wouldn't you be removing that with your idealism?
No, not necessarily. That's a man-made canal that feeds that pond. There's no sort of right of way to maintain that canal. It's maintained mostly by, I think, David Steer and probably the Whiting family. Maintenance on that has been hard to do in the last 5 years. There's been some access issues, depending on the time of year, about getting it to do the maintenance. So there's actually been a lot of leakage from that canal back to the Mill Pond. I think Kent has had conversations with the Whitings about alternatives. Maybe it's just as useful to put like an irrigation well on their own property and have, like at Morning Glory Farm, Jim Atherin has an irrigation well, and when the pond gets to a certain point, the pump kicks on, fills the pond, it keeps going. I think it's safe to say that when you have running water and wetlands, you don't, if someone wants to talk about mosquitoes, those like still water.
Right, mosquitoes basically breed in like standing water.
Yeah.
If there's fish in there, the fish are eating the mosquito larvae.
Right.
That's why if you look at actually any of the salt marshes around here, you see all the rectangular things, the whole idea was to get fish into these backwater areas so the fish could eat the mosquito larvae. So generally, any pond that sustains fish, you're not going to have a lot of mosquito larvae in. It's the stagnant ponds that basically go anoxic, kill off the fish that mosquitoes prosper in.
And then, oh, sorry, Glenn. Yep.
I haven't heard anybody talk about a couple problems. One is
Happy to.
Maley's Pond right now doesn't have
Yep.
any water
Yep,
because the brook is plugged up there. But if you lowered the mill pond, you're going to
Yeah.
get water to Maley's Pond.
actually, I've talked to Kent Healy about that. Is that your question, about how to maintain?
No, that's just one of the
Okay.
observations that I heard you talk about a well, so maybe they could have a well to fill up Maley's Pond. But the other thing is, I haven't talked to Kent about the structure of the bridge where the dam is.
Mhm.
And I know if you pull those boards out, the pond is only going to go down halfway. So somehow you got to blast through concrete and granite or something.
Well, let's not get carried
And
away.
you got to get the state.
If there was ever a dam removal at Mill Pond, there would be a lot of engineering and design work involved with, you guys just don't go in with dynamite and blast a dam out. I mean, you have to know beforehand.
No. One of the big
gonna
issues
happen.
that's going to be with any option for Mill Pond is going to be the American brook lamprey. Basically, that whole area in Lower Mill Brook is what's considered rare species habitat for the American brook lamprey. So if there's any potential impacts on the brook lamprey, it would have to go through another division or another agency within our division called the Natural Heritage Program. And you would have to basically satisfy their concerns that there would be no taking of the American brook lamprey or no impacts to the habitat. So before anything happens on this system, it's going to have to go review by the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program of Division of Mass Wildlife.
And Glenn, as far as the Maley Pond, that's actually, we approved that. That came before the Conservation Commission last week, and Kent filed a request for determination to repair the breach in that man-made diversion, so that should be fixed in a little bit.
Yeah, I know it's going to be fixed,
Yeah,
but.
but then I have more. The way the culvert elevation is that goes under Eggertown Road, there's a 4-foot culvert that goes under Eggertown Road, concrete culvert. The metal pipe that feeds into that 4-foot culvert, like here's the 4-foot culvert, the metal pipe that comes, the 12-inch pipe that comes from Mill Pond is right now set at the very high end of that 4-foot culvert. So you have 3 feet of elevation to work with. Even if the dam were removed at Mill Pond, you could still maintain flow to Factory Brook and to Factory
You have a
Pond.
6 feet, you have a 6-foot hole, not too far from the rail line.
Right, but Kent is,
Where
he's,
the,
Kent's the man with the, Kent Healy, everybody, right here with the, yeah. Kent has about 35 years of data about groundwater elevations in and around Mill Pond and all up and down Mill Brook. And he and I have talked about this, and he was confident that whatever happens at Mill Pond, flow to Maley's Pond, which is designated as a fire pond by the town and needs to be maintained as such. It's hooked up to a dry